Tonight, we're going to explore something that sounds simple, but is actually one of the most surprising ideas in all of history: the hidden forces that shape human civilization. You've probably heard about governments, economies, and societies before. Historians talk about them all the time when explaining how the world works. But here's what most people don't realize. When you truly understand the unseen powers, the systems and influences that quietly guide how people live, it changes how you see the world around you. This is not just about politics or money. It's about forces so deep and complex that they shape history itself. And by the end of this journey, you're going to understand exactly why these forces matter and why nothing else explains human behavior as fully. Before we go any further, if you enjoy careful, deep explorations like this, a quick like or subscribe really helps the channel grow. It's a small thing for you, but it makes a huge difference for me. Now, let's begin. Human civilization is not shaped only by events or visible structures. Beneath the surface, there exist subtle biological forces that guide the choices of every person, quietly steering societies and shaping the world over generations. At the center of these forces is the human brain, a network of neurons and synapses capable of complex thought, memory, and emotion. The brain does not act in isolation. It is influenced constantly by the body it inhabits, the chemical signals that flow through it, and the environment in which it develops. These influences form the foundation of behavior, which in turn becomes the unseen mechanism guiding the formation of societies. The human nervous system processes vast amounts of information every second. Sensory organs collect data about light, sound, temperature, and pressure. Each touch, each change in sound, every subtle movement of air around the skin is converted into electrical impulses that travel along nerves to the brain. These impulses are processed with extraordinary speed. Even without conscious thought, the brain evaluates patterns, detects threats, and anticipates consequences. The decisions that emerge from this system are influenced by survival instincts honed over millions of years of evolution. In a crowd, in a marketplace, in a government assembly, these instincts shape reactions before rational thought even appears. Chemical signals play a central role in guiding human action. Neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine modulate mood, attention, and motivation. When a person experiences reward or pleasure, dopamine signals reinforce behaviors that lead to positive outcomes. Fear and stress trigger adrenaline and cortisol, heightening alertness and preparing the body for action. These chemical systems do not act randomly. They respond to specific stimuli, often subtly nudging behavior in directions that have been historically advantageous for survival and reproduction. Across populations, these responses create patterns of behavior that can be measured and predicted, forming the undercurrent of social organization. Hormones extend this influence beyond immediate brain chemistry. From early childhood, hormones affect growth, appetite, and social behavior. Puberty brings hormonal surges that alter emotional responses, intensifying social awareness and hierarchy recognition. Testosterone and estrogen influence competition and cooperation, shaping tendencies toward aggression, nurturing, or alliance building. Oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, strengthens social bonds and trust within groups. Together, these hormonal processes create predispositions towards certain patterns of interaction, laying the groundwork for cooperation, conflict, and hierarchy in human communities. The structure of the brain itself carries echoes of evolutionary history. The limbic system, responsible for emotions, memory, and motivation, is ancient. It responds rapidly to signals of safety or danger, biasing behavior toward survival. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning, abstract thinking, and moral reasoning, developed later. Its presence allows humans to reflect on choices, but these reflections are constantly filtered through emotional and instinctive priorities. In societies, this dual system produces a balance of risk and caution, innovation and tradition, impulsive action and measured strategy. Civilization is built on this balance, though it is rarely acknowledged, because the patterns emerge naturally from biology. Even the most subtle human interactions are guided by biological predispositions. Eye contact, facial expressions, and body posture convey information about trust, dominance, and intent. These cues are processed subconsciously, shaping how individuals respond to each other. When strangers meet, chemical and neurological signals determine levels of trust or suspicion before words are spoken. In larger groups, these responses amplify. Leaders emerge, alliances form, and collective decisions follow patterns that are rooted in the biology of perception and response. These invisible forces influence politics, commerce, and social movements, long before formal institutions or cultural rules take effect. Memory and learning contribute to the hidden influence of biology on civilization. Neural circuits store experience as patterns that guide future behavior. When a community observes outcomes, success or failure, reward or punishment, individuals internalize these lessons, shaping habits that persist across lifetimes. Cultural practices often reinforce these biological tendencies. For example, rituals and routines align with natural cycles of attention, fatigue, and social engagement. This alignment ensures that the transmission of knowledge and norms is not arbitrary, but tuned to the physiological and cognitive rhythms of the human body. Stress and adaptation are also central to the story of hidden forces. Human physiology is designed to respond to challenges. Short-term stress prepares the body for action, while long-term stress influences behavior, decision-making, and even social hierarchy. In societies facing scarcity, environmental pressure, or conflict, these biological responses scale collectively. Populations experience shifts in aggression, cooperation, and resource allocation. These shifts can determine the rise and fall of communities, the stability of leadership, and the persistence of institutions. The invisible hand of biology acts not only on individuals, but on the structure of society itself. Reproduction and kinship are fundamental drivers of social organization. Genetic imperatives influence mate selection, caregiving, and inheritance practices. Even in complex civilizations, patterns of kinship shape alliances, inheritance of property, and political power. Biological tendencies toward in-group favoritism and reciprocity guide the formation of extended social networks, often predating codified laws. These networks provide resilience, transmitting resources, knowledge, and social support in ways that formal structures often fail to replicate. The accumulation of these networks over generations creates an unseen framework upon which visible societies are constructed. Collective behavior emerges from these intertwined biological systems. Herd instincts, mimicry, and social facilitation show that humans respond to the actions of others automatically. Group movement, opinion formation, and mass coordination often occur without conscious decision-making. Neural and hormonal processes reinforce conformity or deviation based on environmental cues, survival needs, and social hierarchies. Over time, these patterns produce predictable outcomes, from migration and settlement patterns to economic collaboration and conflict resolution. Civilization, in essence, is the amplified result of biological tendencies expressed across many individuals, synchronized by interaction, and shaped over time. The biological forces that control human civilization are constant, pervasive, and subtle. They operate below the level of conscious awareness, yet manifest in measurable ways. From instinctive responses to environmental stimuli to hormonal influences to neural networks guiding perception and memory, the human body acts as the silent architect of society. Every law, trade, alliance, and culture is influenced by these underlying forces. Observing human behavior without acknowledging biology is like trying to understand a river without considering gravity. Civilization is not separate from biology. It is an extension of it, flowing through and shaped by the patterns that evolution, chemistry, and neurophysiology have embedded in every human being. Even after biological systems provide the foundation for human behavior, the mind continues to shape civilization through subtle psychological forces. The brain does not process information as a neutral observer. Instead, it interprets, filters, and emphasizes experiences in ways that create predictable biases. These biases affect choices, judgments, and social behavior, forming a hidden architecture that guides communities and entire societies. From daily decisions to large-scale political movements, cognitive patterns influence the direction of civilization, often without anyone noticing. One of the most consistent patterns is confirmation bias. Individuals tend to seek, notice, and remember information that confirms what they already believe. When new data contradicts existing beliefs, the mind often dismisses or minimizes it. In personal life, this appears in preferences, opinions, and decisions. In groups, confirmation bias scales collectively, shaping public discourse, reinforcing social norms, and influencing the spread of ideas. Entire communities can form shared assumptions, not because they are fully examined, but because the human mind prefers coherence with prior beliefs. Over time, this tendency establishes stable patterns in culture, law, and public behavior. Loss aversion further directs human choice. People generally perceive losses as more significant than equivalent gains. A small loss can produce more emotional impact than a comparable reward. This principle guides decision-making in economics, politics, and social structures. Governments design policies knowing that fear of loss will motivate compliance or participation. Markets react strongly to perceived threats of decline, while communities resist changes that seem risky, even when potential benefits are large. The hidden weight of loss aversion maintains social continuity, discouraging abrupt shifts and reinforcing existing hierarchies and practices. Herd behavior amplifies these tendencies. Humans are naturally attentive to the actions of others, especially in uncertain situations. When a crowd moves, gestures, or reacts, individuals are inclined to follow. This behavior increases efficiency in cooperation, reinforces safety, and allows groups to act as a unit. On the other hand, it also produces conformity, the rapid spread of ideas, and susceptibility to trends. Herd behavior is visible in markets, elections, fashion, and online platforms. Yet it originates from fundamental psychological mechanisms designed to ensure survival and social cohesion. Memory, learning, and attention operate alongside these biases to shape collective outcomes. The brain records experiences selectively, prioritizing unusual, emotionally significant, or repeated events. Knowledge is built incrementally, filtered through individual and cultural lenses. When a society faces recurring challenges, such as scarcity or conflict, collective memory amplifies strategies that proved effective while discouraging approaches that failed. Education, oral traditions, and public records formalize these processes, turning individual cognitive tendencies into societal patterns. The psychology of memory thus becomes a hidden engine for norms, practices, and institutional decisions. Attention, too, is limited and selective. People notice some details while overlooking others, guided by relevance, novelty, and expectation. Leaders, influencers, and institutions can shape which aspects of reality receive collective attention. Media, ritual, and ceremony exploit this selective focus, guiding priorities and perceptions of importance. Even without manipulation, the constraints of attention mean that certain behaviors, crises, or innovations gain more traction simply because they are visible and repeated. These invisible filters shape not only what societies remember, but also what they value. Learning is intertwined with these processes. Humans learn both individually and socially. Observation of peers, imitation, and instruction reinforce behaviors and ideas. Successes are remembered and repeated. Failures are corrected or avoided. In groups, learning operates on multiple levels. Individuals internalize collective knowledge, while social norms and shared experiences create implicit rules. Institutions codify these rules, turning fluid social lessons into formal structures. The psychological mechanisms that support learning ensure that civilization can accumulate knowledge across generations, adapting to new circumstances while maintaining continuity. Decision-making within groups demonstrates another layer of hidden psychological influence. Social proof is a powerful factor. Individuals tend to follow actions that appear common or approved by others. When someone sees many peers taking a specific action, the choice feels validated. This phenomenon underpins collective movements, market trends, and political alignment. Decisions that appear rational on an individual level are often amplified by observation of others, leading to synchronized behavior and the emergence of shared norms without explicit coordination. Authority influence also directs group behavior. Humans are predisposed to respect hierarchy and follow perceived experts. Authority does not require coercion. Its power comes from recognition and trust. From small communities to complex societies, commands from recognized authorities shape compliance, resource allocation, and social order. Experiments across cultures show that ordinary individuals will act in ways that align with authority even against personal judgment. This obedience stabilizes institutions, ensures coordination, and enforces shared rules, yet it also channels behavior along paths that individuals might not independently choose. Persuasion combines these factors to guide choices subtly. Language, presentation, repetition, and framing exploit cognitive tendencies. People respond more to emotionally resonant messages, to repeated ideas, and to information that appears socially validated. Institutions, leaders, and media outlets leverage these tools to influence behavior. Public campaigns, rituals, and educational programs rely on understanding psychological tendencies to achieve predictable outcomes. These strategies work because they align with the brain's built-in heuristics, subtly guiding large-scale behavior while appearing voluntary or natural. Biases, memory, attention, learning, social proof, authority, and persuasion form a web of hidden psychological forces. They operate together, each reinforcing the other. Individually, these mechanisms influence a person's choices and perception. Collectively, they produce patterns of conformity, innovation, resistance, and adaptation across communities. Civilizations evolve under the weight of these intertwined forces, which shape the rules, priorities, and behaviors of societies before formal policies or institutions are imposed. These invisible mechanisms guide the emergence of law, economy, culture, and politics in ways that are measurable yet often unacknowledged. Even the simplest human interaction contains layers of cognitive influence. Choices about trust, cooperation, and judgment are filtered through bias and memory. Subtle cues, repeated patterns, and authority signals push behavior toward predictable directions. Social structures grow from these patterns, reinforced through repeated interaction and observation. Over generations, these psychological tendencies consolidate into shared values, conventions, and institutional behaviors, forming an undercurrent that sustains and directs civilization quietly, constantly, and invisibly. The psychological landscape also interacts with biology. Hormonal states, stress levels, and neural responsiveness shape susceptibility to bias, obedience, and persuasion. In turn, psychological tendencies influence hormonal responses and stress patterns, creating feedback loops that stabilize or destabilize social groups. A population's collective psychology can be influenced by environmental stressors, scarcity, or cultural shifts, demonstrating that civilization is not a product of random chance, but of consistent interactions between mind and body, individual and society. Patterns of communication emerge naturally from these cognitive processes. Ideas are transmitted selectively, remembered with bias, and reinforced by authority and social proof. Communities adopt behaviors and beliefs based on subtle psychological cues rather than explicit instructions. Trends and norms spread faster than rational deliberation would predict. This invisible network of mental processes forms the backbone of social cohesion, economic strategy, political alignment, and cultural evolution. It provides an internal explanation for why human societies often act as if coordinated, even in the absence of centralized control. Through these mechanisms, hidden psychological forces shape human civilization on multiple levels. Individual minds interact, influence, and adapt, generating emergent behavior across populations. Societies develop patterns of stability and change, hierarchy and cooperation, innovation and tradition, all guided by the underlying tendencies of the human brain. The slow accumulation of choices, reinforced by biases, memory, and social influence, channels the evolution of civilizations along paths that are coherent, measurable, and remarkably persistent. These forces operate silently, yet their presence can be seen in every structure, every law, every custom that survives through time. They are the invisible framework upon which visible civilization rests, a network of mind and behavior that has existed as long as humans have formed communities. Language is one of the most powerful hidden forces guiding human civilization. It allows individuals to share experiences, convey ideas, and coordinate actions across time and space. Unlike instinctive behaviors, language requires learning and interpretation, but it amplifies the influence of cognition and social behavior, creating a framework that extends beyond biology and psychology. Through language, humans can organize themselves into complex societies, plan collective tasks, and transmit knowledge that lasts for generations. The patterns of words, phrases, and expressions subtly shape how people think and act, guiding choices and reinforcing social structures. Every conversation, every story, and every shared idea contributes to a network of understanding. Words do not exist merely as labels for objects or actions. They carry meaning, emotion, and expectation. Descriptions influence perception, framing events in ways that affect memory, judgment, and behavior. When communities consistently use certain terms to describe people, actions, or natural phenomena, these linguistic patterns form the basis of culture. They establish boundaries between groups, define roles, and create shared assumptions. Even without formal law, language channels behavior, providing a silent guideline for acceptable conduct and common priorities. The coordination enabled by language is visible in practical activities such as hunting, trade, and construction. Before written records, oral communication allowed groups to plan strategies, divide labor, and adapt to changing environments. Instructions, warnings, and advice passed verbally ensured that individuals could work together efficiently, even in unpredictable conditions. Storytelling preserved knowledge of terrain, seasons, and resources, reducing risk and increasing the chance of survival. These early forms of language created invisible rules that governed behavior, long before civilizations built formal structures or imposed codified laws. Beyond coordination, language transmits culture. Shared narratives, myths, and explanations provide meaning to natural and social phenomena. Cultural norms are reinforced through repeated phrases, ritualized speech, and formal instruction. Communities adopt behaviors not simply because they are practical, but because they are described and valued through language. Moral lessons, social expectations, and collective identity are embedded in stories, proverbs, and songs. Over time, these verbal traditions form stable cultural patterns, influencing how populations organize, cooperate, and judge right from wrong. Language is both the medium and the mechanism through which collective knowledge persists. The spread of information is not always precise, yet it shapes society equally strongly. As ideas move between individuals and across generations, they are often simplified, emphasized, or distorted. Misinformation can travel as quickly as accurate knowledge, exploiting biases, attention patterns, and social influence. Humans tend to trust information from familiar sources, repeated messages, or authority figures. This selective acceptance amplifies the effect of language as a hidden social force, because populations behave according to beliefs, whether true or false. Entire political, economic, and cultural structures are built upon information networks that evolved long before formal communication technologies. Writing magnifies these effects, transforming transient speech into durable records. The creation of symbols to represent sounds, words, or concepts allows knowledge to persist beyond individual memory. Written records stabilize laws, transactions, and cultural teachings. They allow societies to coordinate over larger distances and longer time spans. Through writing, humans can compare outcomes, learn from predecessors, and standardize practices. The presence of written knowledge reduces the reliance on individual memory, reinforcing shared understanding and creating consistency in behavior across populations and generations. Symbols and diagrams expand this system further. Maps, charts, and pictograms convey complex information without extensive explanation. Mathematical symbols allow precise calculation, planning, and measurement. Religious symbols convey moral and spiritual meaning, guiding behavior and expectations subtly yet persistently. Even abstract symbols, when widely understood, influence how people perceive space, time, and social hierarchy. The visual representation of ideas forms an additional layer of hidden control, shaping collective cognition and enabling large-scale coordination that is impossible through speech alone. Knowledge repositories, such as libraries, archives, and databases, institutionalize this influence. By storing, organizing, and transmitting information systematically, societies can accumulate lessons across generations. Practices that might otherwise be lost become standardized. discoveries build on previous insights. Institutions gain authority through access to recorded knowledge. The selective preservation of information also influences what populations remember and prioritize. Societies act in ways shaped by the content and availability of these repositories, making knowledge itself a hidden but tangible force directing civilization. Language also serves as a tool of social influence and hierarchy. The ability to communicate persuasively, to explain, argue, or instruct, can elevate an individual's status or authority. Leaders, scholars, and influencers leverage language to guide decisions, shape norms, and enforce compliance. Vocabulary and rhetoric convey power subtly, signaling expertise, credibility, or social position. In every context, from marketplaces to courts to councils, language acts as an instrument that aligns individual behavior with collective goals, often without explicit coercion. Cross-generational transmission demonstrates the cumulative power of language. Oral and written traditions allow ideas to survive long after the originators are gone. Scientific observations, ethical codes, technological instructions, and cultural values are passed forward, shaping populations' expectations and behavior long before each new generation forms its own experiences. Language ensures that society does not start anew with each individual, but benefits from the cumulative wisdom, mistakes, and strategies of those who came before. Civilization advances because humans can share, store, and learn from accumulated knowledge. Communication also integrates with psychological and biological forces. Language guides attention, frames perceptions, and reinforces memory. Social interactions structured by conversation stimulate neural pathways, encourage learning, and build bonds. Words trigger emotional and physiological responses that alter decision-making. Repetition strengthens beliefs. Framing shapes priorities. Narrative organizes complex information into digestible, actionable forms. The invisible interplay of language, cognition, and biology produces patterns of behavior that scale to populations, directing collective action and influencing the evolution of culture and institutions. Information networks grow in complexity alongside human settlement and technology. Markets, bureaucracies, and educational systems depend on the reliability of communication channels. Standards for measurement, language, and record-keeping facilitate large-scale cooperation. Misalignment or failure in these systems can disrupt coordination, reduce efficiency, and destabilize societies. Conversely, robust communication networks amplify civilization's reach and resilience. The capacity to exchange information widely and accurately allows ideas, norms, and strategies to propagate, making language a foundational force that organizes human activity at every scale. Even subtle forms of language, like tone, repetition, and emphasis, carry significant weight in shaping behavior. Oral traditions, speeches, and rituals rely on these cues to reinforce social hierarchy, encourage conformity, or motivate collective effort. Written forms encode emphasis through structure, style, and visual design. Over time, these small elements of communication accumulate, guiding populations along paths that reinforce stability, hierarchy, and coordinated action. Civilization emerges not only through material structures or institutions, but through the silent, pervasive patterns embedded in communication itself. In essence, language and communication act as both tool and force. They allow humans to coordinate, to transmit knowledge, and to influence one another. The mechanisms of speech, writing, symbols, and repositories shape thought, reinforce social norms, and maintain collective memory. Civilization depends on these systems as much as it does on biology or psychology. By examining how ideas flow, persist, and evolve, it becomes clear that language is a hidden engine of social structure, guiding individual behavior and collective organization, reinforcing existing patterns, and enabling the expansion of human societies over space and time. The influence of language is continuous, cumulative, and profoundly formative, shaping civilization quietly yet unmistakably with every spoken word, written record, and shared idea contributing to the unseen framework upon which societies rise, endure, and transform. The organization of resources is one of the most significant hidden forces shaping human civilization. From the earliest communities, the need to acquire, store, and distribute food, tools, and materials created patterns of cooperation and competition that extended far beyond individual households. Trade emerged as a practical solution. When one group had a surplus of grain and another had excess fish, exchange allowed both to survive more effectively. These early exchanges relied on trust, memory, and reciprocity. Simple barter systems laid the groundwork for more complex economic structures that now govern societies across the world. Markets developed naturally as a way to coordinate the supply and demand of goods. When resources are unevenly distributed, communities need mechanisms to determine who receives what and at what cost. Markets provide signals through price, quantity, and availability. Even in societies without formal currency, people respond to these indicators, adjusting production, trade, and consumption to match need. Over time, patterns of exchange become institutionalized, forming networks of cooperation and dependency that expand from local villages to regions and eventually continents. The unseen dynamics of supply and demand guide behavior across populations, shaping where people settle, how they work, and which goods are considered valuable. The introduction of money created another layer of influence. By assigning abstract value to coins, notes, or tokens, societies could store wealth, standardize exchange, and coordinate activity over longer distances and timeframes. Money simplifies trade, reduces friction, and allows specialization. Artisans can focus on specific skills, farmers can grow surplus crops, and merchants can transport goods between distant locations. These systems do not exist only on paper. They are grounded in trust, social convention, and collective belief. Civilization depends on the consistent use of these symbols, which act as invisible levers guiding production, cooperation, and accumulation. Labor organization is another dimension of economic influence. People naturally divide tasks based on skill, strength, experience, and social structure. Specialization increases efficiency, but it also creates interdependence. One person's output depends on the contributions of many others. This interdependence encourages social cohesion, as well as the emergence of hierarchies, leadership, and coordination mechanisms. Labor patterns often mirror broader cultural and psychological tendencies, such as the preference for cooperation, attention to skill, and recognition of authority. The invisible organization of work determines the rhythm of daily life and the capacity of societies to sustain large populations. Wealth distribution reflects both opportunity and constraint. Some individuals accumulate more resources due to skill, luck, inheritance, or social position. Others have less, creating gradients that influence behavior, cooperation, and conflict. Inequality can motivate innovation, encourage trade, and generate investment, but it can also produce tension, rebellion, or migration. Patterns of wealth are rarely random. They are shaped by cultural norms, institutions, and biological tendencies, such as risk preference, ambition, and cooperation. Across generations, these patterns influence access to education, power, and resources, subtly reinforcing social hierarchies and institutional structures. Resource scarcity acts as a hidden driver of social dynamics. When food, water, or materials are limited, competition intensifies. Societies develop rules to allocate what is available, creating systems of governance, law, and enforcement. Scarcity also encourages innovation. Irrigation systems, crop rotation, and storage techniques emerge as solutions. Conversely, periods of abundance allow populations to expand, diversify labor, and invest in infrastructure or culture. The psychological impact of scarcity and plenty shapes decision-making, risk tolerance, and collective behavior. Resource availability, though often overlooked, structures settlement, hierarchy, and societal stability. Economic systems also respond to environment and geography. Fertile valleys, river networks, and mineral deposits attract settlement and trade. Communities adapt production and consumption to the local ecology, creating patterns of specialization. Surpluses in one region may flow to areas of shortage, establishing long-distance trade networks. These networks are not only practical, they create cultural exchange, influence political alliances, and reinforce interdependence. Civilization grows along these veins of resource and trade, guided by the invisible logic of geography, availability, and human ingenuity. Population density interacts with economic structures in subtle ways. High density encourages division of labor, specialization, and institutional development. Low density requires self-sufficiency, shared labor, and local cooperation. Economic behavior emerges from these conditions. Markets, monetary systems, and trade routes develop where population clusters create opportunity. Patterns of settlement, urbanization, and transportation reflect the interaction between human needs, resource distribution, and social organization. The unseen principles of supply, demand, and labor allocation shape not only material life, but also cultural norms and social hierarchy. Economic systems are further influenced by risk and uncertainty. Production, trade, and consumption involve decisions about the future, which are never fully predictable. Communities develop methods to mitigate risk. Storage, insurance, legal contracts, and social agreements. Trust becomes a form of currency, as reliance on others reduces uncertainty. Institutions codify these behaviors, creating formal rules, markets, and legal systems. Individual decisions, informed by psychology and biology, combine to generate collective patterns of risk management that sustain civilization and allow it to adapt to change. The accumulation and transfer of wealth extend across generations. Inheritance, property laws, and social customs preserve material advantage, while shaping expectations of status and behavior. Families, clans, and communities maintain continuity of knowledge and resources, influencing education, occupation, and political influence. These mechanisms ensure that social structures are stable, even as individual actors come and go. Civilization is guided not only by immediate needs, but by long-term accumulation and distribution, driven by the interplay of material necessity, trust, and social convention. Trade networks influence cultural exchange and political organization. Regions connected by exchange adopt technologies, ideas, and customs from one another. Markets and commerce encourage standardization of measurement, writing, and currency, reinforcing shared norms and cooperation. Economic interdependence creates incentives for stability and conflict resolution. When resources cross borders, societies become connected in ways that extend beyond individual perception. The unseen architecture of exchange guides behavior at both local and global scales, shaping civilization through everyday transactions. Scarcity, abundance, and distribution also interact with psychological tendencies. People respond to perceived shortage with caution, competition, or hoarding. They respond to abundance with cooperation, sharing, and investment. Collective memory preserves lessons of famine or plenty, guiding policy and behavior over generations. These patterns reinforce social hierarchies, cultural norms, and institutional rules. The hidden interplay between perception, biology, and economic structures channels civilization along paths that are coherent, measurable, and remarkably persistent. Resource management extends into political and institutional realms. Leaders establish rules to allocate goods, stabilize markets, and ensure security. Law, enforcement, and social custom formalize informal agreements, reducing uncertainty and maintaining trust. Successful management increases the capacity for population growth, cultural development, and technological innovation. Civilizations that fail to organize resources effectively face decline, migration, or collapse. The invisible principles of supply, demand, and distribution act as a foundation upon which formal governance structures are built. Even everyday life is shaped by economic patterns. Decisions about what to grow, buy, or sell, where to work, and how to exchange value all reflect underlying principles of scarcity, efficiency, and trade. Labor patterns, wage structures, and occupational specialization respond to both immediate need and long-term strategy. Markets, monetary systems, and resource flows influence social mobility, opportunity, and access. Across time and space, these patterns accumulate into large-scale structures that sustain cities, nations, and empires, directing human activity with subtle but pervasive influence. The hidden economic forces that control civilization are not abstract. They manifest through the rhythms of production, trade, and consumption, the allocation of wealth, the organization of labor, and the management of scarcity and abundance. They operate alongside biological, psychological, and cultural systems, coordinating behavior, encouraging cooperation, and regulating conflict. Civilization is continuously guided by these principles, shaping the material foundation of society, influencing human behavior, and providing a framework for the evolution of communities across generations. Economic systems are both the mirror and the engine of collective human action, translating individual needs and choices into patterns that endure, scale, and shape the course of history. Leadership and governance are among the most subtle forces shaping human civilization. Communities naturally develop systems to organize behavior, enforce rules, and coordinate collective action. Even in the smallest groups, leaders emerge, sometimes because of skill, strength, or knowledge, sometimes because of social recognition or reputation. Leadership allows decisions to be made more efficiently, conflicts to be resolved, and resources to be managed. These roles are often invisible in daily life, yet they provide the structure necessary for collective survival and long-term organization. Law arises from the need to regulate behavior and reduce uncertainty. When people interact, disagreements over resources, territory, or social norms inevitably occur. Rules, whether formal or informal, provide guidance on what is acceptable and what is not. Early laws were often codified, orally or through custom, shaped by observation of consequences and the needs of the group. Communities that maintained consistent rules experienced greater stability and cohesion. Law functions not only to punish wrongdoing, but also to reinforce expectations, coordinate cooperation, and preserve trust, all of which are essential for the growth of civilization. Governance structures evolved to manage increasingly complex societies. Simple councils, assemblies, or elder groups give way to more formal institutions as populations grow and interactions become more complicated. Leadership becomes distributed, with specialized roles for decision-making, conflict resolution, and administration. These systems are designed to handle both routine coordination and exceptional circumstances. The effectiveness of governance is determined not only by the authority of leaders, but also by the structures that support them, ensuring continuity even when individuals change. The invisible rules of governance direct behavior across communities, often more effectively than explicit enforcement alone. Power dynamics are central to understanding political influence. Authority does not exist in isolation. It is recognized and reinforced by others. Leaders gain legitimacy through skill, charisma, tradition, or performance. People comply not only because of coercion, but because they perceive the authority as valid or trustworthy. This perception shapes obedience, alliance formation, and social stability. Power dynamics extend beyond leaders to include networks of influence, advisors, and intermediaries. The distribution of power, though rarely equal, stabilizes societies by creating predictable patterns of decision-making and social expectation. Social contracts emerge naturally from these dynamics. Groups establish implicit agreements about behavior, rights, and obligations. Individuals accept rules in exchange for protection, resource access, or social cohesion. Even without written laws, these agreements regulate interactions, reduce conflict, and promote cooperation. Over time, social contracts become formalized, codified in legal codes or institutional frameworks. They shape expectations about authority, responsibility, and reciprocity, forming a hidden foundation that guides collective behavior while remaining largely unseen in everyday life. Bureaucracies develop as societies grow in size and complexity. Administrative systems manage resources, enforce rules, and coordinate large populations. Clerks, record keepers, and officials handle data, transactions, and compliance. Their work is often invisible but essential. Without coordination, resources are misallocated, disputes escalate, and governance fails. Bureaucracies rely on standardized procedures, documentation, and hierarchy to function consistently. These structures embed rules and expectations into the functioning of society, guiding human behavior through systems that are impersonal yet profoundly influential. Institutions form another layer of influence. Schools, courts, religious bodies, guilds, and councils extend the reach of governance and social norms. They transmit values, enforce rules, and organize behavior beyond immediate personal interaction. Institutions persist across generations, providing stability, authority, and continuity. Individuals learn to navigate these structures from early experience, internalizing patterns of behavior that maintain social order. Civilization depends on the combined effect of institutions and bureaucracy to coordinate activity, maintain cohesion, and ensure predictability in large populations. Rule enforcement is both practical and symbolic. Physical enforcement, such as policing or military power, ensures compliance when norms are violated. Yet much influence operates through expectation and recognition. People adjust behavior because rules are understood, authority is respected, and social sanctions exist. Compliance arises not only from fear of punishment, but from internalized norms and trust in systems. Enforcement, therefore, reinforces both individual behavior and collective stability, shaping the visible and invisible contours of society. Political systems also adapt to environmental and social conditions. Resource availability, population density, and external threats influence the centralization, hierarchy, and distribution of power. Leaders develop strategies for resource allocation, conflict management, and public order. Governance evolves to manage complexity while preserving flexibility, ensuring societies can respond to challenges without collapsing. The unseen rules of administration, authority, and enforcement create a framework that allows civilizations to persist and expand, even as conditions change. Public participation and consent influence governance indirectly. Even when formal authority is concentrated, collective behavior shapes what leaders can achieve. Rebellion, migration, negotiation, and alliance formation act as feedback mechanisms that guide political strategy. Leaders who ignore these signals risk instability. Social cohesion, trust, and shared values create an invisible framework that enables rulers to act effectively. Civilization advances not only through explicit authority, but through the continuous, subtle interactions between governed and governing, forming a dynamic network of influence. Leadership succession is another hidden mechanism. Systems develop ways to transfer authority smoothly, whether through inheritance, election, appointment, or merit. These procedures reduce uncertainty, maintain stability, and reinforce social hierarchies. Individuals learn the rules of succession and internalize expectations about loyalty, responsibility, and continuity. By embedding succession mechanisms into social practice, societies ensure that governance remains functional even as specific actors change, preventing collapse and preserving institutional memory. Civilizations also respond to internal and external pressures. Economic shifts, environmental stress, and social change challenge political structures. Effective governance adapts by modifying rules, reallocating resources, and adjusting enforcement. Leaders interpret signals from both population behavior and resource availability, guiding societies along sustainable paths. Political systems that fail to respond face decline, instability, or replacement. The unseen mechanisms of authority, law, and enforcement operate continuously, providing the invisible scaffolding that stabilizes societies and channels collective action. Decision-making within governance reflects both human cognition and social psychology. Leaders rely on advice, precedent, and consensus while navigating uncertainty. Groups make choices through deliberation, voting, or consultation, balancing individual interests with collective needs. Psychological tendencies such as authority recognition, social proof, and risk aversion interact with institutional rules to shape outcomes. Even the most mundane administrative action is guided by layers of invisible influence, ensuring that behavior aligns with broader societal goals while remaining coordinated across large populations. The evolution of law, leadership, and governance demonstrates that civilization is shaped by systems that operate quietly yet effectively. Authority, legitimacy, social contracts, bureaucracies, institutions, and enforcement mechanisms guide behavior across generations. They regulate cooperation, manage conflict, and allocate resources. These mechanisms emerge from human interaction, psychological tendencies, and environmental necessity, forming an invisible but powerful network that organizes society. The patterns established by governance are not imposed by chance. They reflect the interplay of human cognition, culture, and social need, continuously shaping the development of civilization. Even small communities reveal the influence of governance. Rules about cooperation, resource sharing, and leadership behavior produce predictable outcomes. Larger societies replicate these patterns at scale, embedding governance into daily life, social expectation, and institutional practice. The hidden architecture of political systems sustains stability, enables coordination, and channels human activity along paths that are both predictable and adaptable. Civilization thrives because these mechanisms operate invisibly, reinforcing order, enabling cooperation, and providing continuity across generations. Culture shapes human behavior in ways that are often invisible but remarkably powerful. Shared beliefs, rituals, and moral systems guide how people interact, what they value, and how communities function. These cultural patterns are learned early in life and reinforced through observation, imitation, and instruction. Individuals adjust behavior to align with expectations, creating predictability in social interactions. Even without formal law or enforcement, culture operates as a quiet but effective regulator of human activity, providing the framework for cooperation and social cohesion. Rituals are one of the most visible expressions of cultural influence. Daily routines, seasonal ceremonies, and public observances communicate norms and reinforce shared identity. Rituals teach timing, hierarchy, and roles, while also creating emotional connection among participants. Repetition strengthens memory and internalizes expectations, so behaviors are performed reliably without explicit oversight. Across generations, these practices become embedded in social life, shaping everything from family structure to governance, commerce, and community organization. Religion and ideology amplify these effects. Belief systems provide explanations for natural events, human behavior, and social order. They establish moral frameworks that guide action and judgment, defining what is considered right or wrong, acceptable or forbidden. Religious institutions reinforce these norms through teaching, ceremony, and symbolic authority. Ideologies, secular or spiritual, perform similar functions, organizing thought, prioritizing values, and aligning collective behavior. Together, they create powerful incentives for conformity and cooperation, often more effective than laws or coercion. Moral systems influence both individual choices and collective behavior. People internalize principles about fairness, reciprocity, and justice, which guide interactions even when no authority is present. Communities enforce these standards informally, rewarding adherence and discouraging deviation through social approval or disapproval. Over time, moral expectations shape trust, collaboration, and the ability to resolve conflict without formal intervention. Civilization relies on these shared frameworks to maintain cohesion, enabling large groups to function effectively. Cultural transmission ensures that knowledge, norms, and values persist across generations. Children learn by observing adults, imitating behavior, and participating in community activities. Stories, songs, and symbols preserve lessons about survival, social behavior, and communal priorities. Written records, art, and architecture extend this transmission further, allowing ideas to persist across centuries. Knowledge is thus cumulative, building on prior experience and reinforcing social cohesion. Culture becomes both a repository and a guiding force, invisible yet deeply influential in shaping civilization. Adaptation is a key feature of cultural systems. Communities modify beliefs, rituals, and practices in response to environmental, technological, or social changes. Successful adaptations are reinforced and transmitted, while ineffective ones are abandoned. This selective process produces patterns of stability and flexibility, allowing societies to endure and evolve. Cultural adaptation, interacts with psychology and biology, aligning group behavior with survival needs, resource management, and social structure. Civilization progresses through this continuous adjustment of norms and practices. Symbols and shared meaning extend the reach of culture. Objects, images, and language convey complex ideas without verbal explanation. Flags, religious icons, and ceremonial objects communicate values, status, and identity instantly. Symbols unify groups, signal allegiance, and establish boundaries. They act as shortcuts for understanding expectations and reinforcing norms. In this way, even subtle cultural cues can have measurable effects on behavior, guiding cooperation, hierarchy, and shared goals within and across communities. Collective identity emerges from the combination of beliefs, rituals, and symbols. People recognize themselves as part of a group with shared purpose and understanding. This identity motivates cooperation, collective defense, and adherence to norms. Groups enforce cohesion through social recognition, approval, and informal sanctions. Individuals internalize these standards, regulating behavior to align with group expectations. The invisible influence of collective identity is central to the stability of civilizations, allowing large populations to act in coordinated ways without explicit direction. Religion, ideology, and moral frameworks also influence resource allocation, law, and political authority. Leaders draw legitimacy from shared beliefs, and social cohesion is reinforced through common values. Practices like charity, tribute, or ritualized offering organize material resources and strengthen networks of support. Moral teachings encourage compliance with rules, respect for hierarchy, and cooperation. The integration of ethical and spiritual guidance with social structure provides a powerful mechanism for directing human behavior across diverse communities. Cultural forces are cumulative and self-reinforcing. Shared knowledge, repeated rituals, and common values stabilize social patterns. Deviations are corrected through social feedback, and successful behaviors are preserved through observation and instruction. Over time, these mechanisms produce predictable patterns of human interaction, shaping the distribution of power, cooperation, and social innovation. Civilization grows not only through material infrastructure or formal institutions, but through the invisible, continuous influence of culture, belief, and shared moral frameworks, guiding populations quietly and persistently across time. Networks and technology form an invisible framework that influences human civilization profoundly. Roads, bridges, ports, and later railways and airways are more than tools for movement. They define how people interact, exchange goods, and share information. The layout of these networks shapes trade patterns, political alliances, and cultural exchange. Communities with greater connectivity can respond to crises, distribute resources efficiently, and adopt innovations faster. Even small adjustments in infrastructure can ripple across regions, influencing economic activity, social cohesion, and population movement in ways that are not immediately visible. Communication networks amplify these effects. Written letters, courier systems, newspapers, telegraphs, and telephones all increase the speed and reach of information. The efficiency of these networks determines how quickly societies can coordinate, plan, and adapt. Communities with reliable communication can respond to environmental change, market fluctuations, or political events more effectively than those without. Information flows form the backbone of governance, commerce, and cultural transmission, creating an invisible structure that channels behavior across distances and generations. Media and information control extend the influence of networks into thought and perception. By determining what is highlighted, repeated, or Suppressed, communication channels shape public understanding and priorities. News, storytelling, and now digital media influence beliefs, opinions, and expectations. Audiences are guided by patterns of exposure and reinforcement, often responding as much to repetition and framing as to factual content. Information, therefore, is not neutral. It acts as a hidden force, directing attention, shaping cognition, and influencing collective decision-making across populations. Digital ecosystems magnify the power of information networks. Online platforms, social media, and global communication channels allow ideas to spread instantaneously. Patterns of attention, engagement, and reinforcement amplify certain behaviors while suppressing others. Algorithms prioritize content that aligns with user behavior, creating feedback loops that influence perception and choice. These systems operate largely unseen, yet they shape cultural trends, economic activity, political alignment, and social interaction. The architecture of digital networks is a force in itself, guiding human behavior through structure, flow, and feedback. Technological innovations interact with social and psychological systems. Tools that extend vision, sound, or computation allow humans to act and plan in ways that would otherwise be impossible. Measurement, record keeping, and modeling enable more accurate predictions, resource management, and coordination. Each new technology accelerates society's ability to adapt, trade, or govern, while also creating new constraints and dependencies. Communities evolve in response to the capabilities and limitations of their technology, embedding innovation into the continuous shaping of civilization. The spread of technology is mediated by existing networks and knowledge systems. Communities connected by roads, rivers, or digital platforms adopt innovations faster. Education, language, and culture influence how technologies are used and adapted. The same tool may have different social and economic effects depending on context, demonstrating that networks shape not only access, but also application. Civilization's pace of change is therefore constrained or accelerated by both the presence of technology and the structures that allow it to flow through society. Information flow determines social coordination in subtle ways. The timing, accuracy, and reach of messages influence responses to scarcity, conflict, or opportunity. Populations adjust behavior based on the perceived actions of others, creating synchronization and shared expectation. In markets, governance, or cultural practice, information acts as a hidden regulator. Societies with reliable and rapid transmission can prevent conflict, distribute resources efficiently, and foster innovation. Societies lacking effective channels face slower adaptation, increased risk, and vulnerability to disruption. Technological infrastructure also defines power relationships. Communities or states that control key networks, roads, ports, digital systems, can exert influence over others. Control over information and communication allows guidance of behavior, enforcement of policy, and shaping of public opinion. Authority can extend far beyond immediate presence as messages, orders, and guidance travel through the network. Power flows through these invisible channels, linking governance, commerce, and culture in ways that are often unnoticed by individuals within the system. Every innovation produces both opportunities and constraints. Tools, systems, and processes allow new forms of cooperation, trade, and communication, but they also impose requirements. Societies must maintain, defend, and understand technological systems to benefit from them. Infrastructure failures, information bottlenecks, or misuse can disrupt coordination, weaken authority, and slow progress. The interplay between technology and human systems demonstrates that innovations are not neutral. They are embedded in social, political, and economic contexts, shaping the development of civilization in profound ways. Networks and technology, from physical roads to digital connections, form a hidden web that guides the flow of goods, information, and influence. They enable coordination, enhance perception, and amplify authority, while also creating dependencies and constraints. The reach and structure of these systems determine how societies evolve, how knowledge spreads, and how collective behavior is organized. Civilization advances through the accumulation of tools, systems, and communication channels. Yet these very structures invisibly steer the course of human activity, guiding decisions, shaping priorities, and linking individuals across space and time. The environment in which human societies develop exerts a profound but often invisible influence on civilization. Geography, climate, and the availability of natural resources determine where people can settle, what crops they can grow, and how they organize their communities. Rivers, valleys, and plains encourage dense settlements because they provide fertile land and water for agriculture. Mountains, deserts, and frozen regions limit movement, isolate populations, and create unique social structures adapted to local conditions. The physical landscape serves as a silent architect, shaping human activity in ways that are both immediate and long-lasting. Climate influences not only the abundance of resources, but also the timing and methods of their use. Seasonal rainfall, temperature fluctuations, and natural cycles dictate planting and harvesting schedules, the storage of food, and the development of irrigation or drainage systems. Harsh climates often necessitate cooperative labor and innovation, while milder regions allow for surplus production and population growth. Weather patterns affect trade as well. Predictable routes and safe travel corridors emerge where conditions are favorable, while storms, floods, or droughts impose risk and require adaptation. Natural resources guide economic activity and societal priorities. Fertile soil, forests, fresh water, minerals, and energy sources attract settlement and determine wealth distribution. Regions rich in resources often become centers of trade, while areas with scarcity develop strategies for import, conservation, or technological adaptation. The invisible influence of resources extends to social organization, political power, and conflict. Communities compete for access, form alliances, or develop rules to manage scarcity, shaping civilization in ways that are often unrecognized yet profound. Environmental pressures also influence urbanization. Access to water, arable land, and defensible positions encourages the growth of villages and cities. Cities emerge at crossroads, riverbanks, or coastal ports, where trade and communication are convenient. Urban centers concentrate labor, knowledge, and culture, creating hubs of innovation and governance. Yet cities also require infrastructure, sanitation, and resource management, making them sensitive to environmental constraints. Successful urbanization reflects the interplay between human ingenuity and ecological conditions, revealing the hidden force of geography in shaping society. Agriculture demonstrates the direct connection between environment and civilization. Crops and livestock require specific soils, water, and climate conditions. Communities adapt planting methods, irrigation systems, and crop rotation to maximize yield and reduce risk. Agricultural surplus supports specialization, trade, and population growth, creating the foundation for complex societies. Failures in adaptation due to drought, soil depletion, or flooding can produce famine, migration, and political instability. The invisible influence of ecological conditions is thus intertwined with the rise and decline of civilizations over time. Trade networks are similarly guided by geography. Natural corridors, such as rivers, coastlines, and mountain passes, facilitate the movement of goods and ideas. Obstacles such as deserts, swamps, or rugged terrain restrict exchange and shape the distribution of knowledge, culture, and technology. Societies adapt by developing roads, bridges, and transport methods to overcome environmental limitations. These adaptations extend human influence into regions that would otherwise remain isolated. Yet the success and form of trade remain constrained by geography and climate, shaping patterns of interaction across civilizations. Environmental constraints interact with technology and social organization. Irrigation channels, terraced fields, and storage facilities allow communities to manage water, soil, and food supply more effectively. These innovations increase resilience, support larger populations, and enable urban growth. At the same time, dependence on technology creates vulnerability. Failures in water systems, soil management, or transportation can disrupt entire societies. The interplay between environment and human systems is continuous, guiding development through both opportunity and limitation. Natural hazards also shape human settlement and planning. Floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, and volcanic activity require awareness, preparation, and adaptation. Communities develop housing, infrastructure, and governance strategies to mitigate risk. Knowledge of environmental patterns is encoded in traditions, laws, and construction practices. Cultural adaptation to natural hazards is a silent but persistent force that influences population density, trade routes, and resource allocation. Human ingenuity mediates ecological pressures, but the environment continues to constrain options and shape outcomes. Population growth is constrained and guided by ecological limits. Availability of water, food, and shelter determines sustainable density, while social structures and technology mediate these limits. Regions that can support high density develop complex institutions, markets, and governance structures. Areas that face scarcity often maintain dispersed settlements, mobile lifestyles, or cooperative resource sharing. These patterns shape cultural development, political authority, and economic networks. Environmental pressures act as an invisible regulator of societal scale, influencing the pace and direction of civilization. Civilization evolves in constant interaction with the environment. Societies adapt to ecological constraints while attempting to modify them through irrigation, terracing, deforestation, and construction. Resource availability, climate stability, and geographic position all create conditions for success or challenge. Trade, governance, and cultural practices reflect these ecological realities, even when they are not immediately recognized. Human societies are both shaped by and shaping their environment, creating a dynamic feedback loop. Geography and ecology are hidden forces guiding settlement, social organization, and the trajectory of civilization over time, acting quietly yet continuously to direct the development and resilience of communities across the globe. Civilizations are shaped by complex interactions that operate far beyond the perception of any single individual. Human societies function as systems where biological, psychological, cultural, technological, and environmental forces overlap, reinforcing and constraining one another. Each layer interacts continuously, producing patterns of behavior and organization that emerge naturally from the underlying structures. These interactions create feedback loops, processes where outcomes of one action influence future decisions and actions, often in ways that are difficult to predict. Feedback loops operate quietly but persistently, guiding the trajectory of civilization over generations. At the individual level, biological and psychological tendencies contribute to collective behavior. Humans seek food, safety, and social connection. They remember past experiences, form expectations, and adjust behavior in response to others. Biases, heuristics, and emotions influence decision-making, shaping patterns of cooperation and competition. When individuals interact repeatedly, their decisions compound, producing emergent effects that are visible only at the level of groups or societies. Simple patterns, like trusting familiar sources or imitating successful neighbors, accumulate across populations to generate large-scale behavior that is greater than the sum of individual intentions. Cultural norms and institutions amplify these effects. Shared beliefs, rituals, and moral frameworks guide behavior in predictable ways. Individuals internalize expectations about fairness, authority, and reciprocity, producing stability without explicit enforcement. Institutions codify knowledge and distribute resources, creating structured channels through which behavior occurs. As people follow these patterns, feedback loops emerge. Adherence to norms reinforces social cohesion, and deviation triggers correction or adaptation. These loops stabilize societies, maintaining continuity even as individual members change over time. Technology introduces additional complexity. Innovations in tools, infrastructure, and communication extend human capacity, enabling larger populations and more intricate organization. At the same time, dependence on technology creates vulnerabilities. Failures in infrastructure, loss of knowledge, or miscommunication can propagate rapidly, producing consequences far beyond the initial point of failure. Each technological advancement interacts with psychological tendencies, cultural norms, and economic structures, creating feedback loops that accelerate change or constrain behavior. Civilization evolves as these forces adjust to one another, continuously recalibrating the system. Economic structures operate within these loops. Markets, trade, networks, labor organization, and resource allocation respond to supply, demand, and population behavior. When resources become scarce, individuals and institutions adjust production and consumption. Surpluses enable specialization, innovation, and population growth. The responses of multiple actors create collective outcomes, such as urbanization, technological development, or social stratification. These outcomes feed back into resource availability, labor distribution, and economic priorities, reinforcing or challenging existing patterns. The interdependence of economic activity and human behavior generates cycles of stability, growth, and crisis that shape civilization over centuries. Political systems are equally subject to feedback. Governance, law, and leadership influence social coordination, resource allocation, and conflict resolution. Decisions made by leaders affect population behavior, which in turn influences future policies. Public compliance, rebellion, negotiation, and alliance formation serve as feedback mechanisms that either reinforce authority or prompt adaptation. Bureaucracies, institutions, and legal systems provide structural stability, translating individual action into predictable outcomes. Feedback loops ensure that governance remains responsive to both internal dynamics and external pressures, maintaining societal resilience or, in cases of failure, enabling collapse. Environmental and geographical factors interact with human systems to create additional loops. Resource availability, climate patterns, and natural hazards affect settlement, agriculture, and trade. Communities adapt to these conditions through technology, cultural practices, and organizational structures. Successful adaptations reinforce stability, while failures create stress that may lead to migration, conflict, or societal restructuring. Human responses further modify the environment, such as through irrigation, deforestation, or urban development, creating cyclical interactions. Civilization is shaped continuously by these ecological feedbacks, which operate quietly yet persistently over time. Emergent patterns appear when these multiple forces interact. Large populations produce behaviors and outcomes that could not have been predicted from individual actions alone. Migration patterns, trade networks, technological diffusion, and cultural evolution arise spontaneously from the interplay of simple rules, individual choices, and environmental constraints. Small changes can propagate through the system, producing disproportionately large effects. Feedback loops magnify these dynamics, creating pathways for growth, innovation, and transformation that are invisible at the level of daily experience but decisive over decades and centuries. Tipping points represent moments when incremental changes push a system into a qualitatively new state. Gradual shifts in population, resource use, technology, or social norms can accumulate until the existing structure can no longer maintain stability. When thresholds are crossed, societies may undergo rapid transformation, whether in economic organization, governance, or cultural practice. These transitions illustrate the cumulative influence of hidden forces, showing that stability is not permanent, but contingent on the balance of interacting systems. Even minor disruptions can trigger cascading effects when feedback loops align toward amplification. Resilience emerges from the ability of these systems to absorb shocks without collapsing. Redundancy, diversity, and adaptability enhance stability. Multiple feedback loops operating at different scales provide buffering. Social norms maintain cooperation when formal governance is weak. Technological innovations compensate for environmental stress. Economic flexibility mitigates resource scarcity. Resilient societies can recover from natural disasters, political upheaval, or economic crises because the system's interactions allow adaptation rather than collapse. Feedback loops operate both to destabilize and to stabilize, depending on context and scale. Large-scale societal shifts demonstrate the power of interacting hidden forces. The rise of cities, empires, and global trade networks results from the compounding of social, economic, technological, and environmental interactions. Agricultural surpluses enable specialization, which feeds innovation, which drives trade, which increases population density, which requires governance, which reinforces social norms, which stabilizes coordination, and so forth. Each layer contributes to emergent complexity, producing structures and behaviors that could not have been engineered deliberately, yet function efficiently across millions of people. Cycles of growth and decline exemplify these principles. Civilizations expand when positive feedback loops reinforce cooperation, resource efficiency, and innovation. Overextension, resource depletion, or social fragmentation can reverse these loops, creating contraction or collapse. Historical examples show that these cycles are not random. They reflect the interplay of biological, psychological, cultural, technological, and environmental systems. Feedback loops propagate effects across scales, producing outcomes that are the product of many small interactions, yet decisive in shaping the course of history. Interdependence is a key characteristic of complex societies. Each element, individuals, groups, institutions, technology, and environment, depends on the others. Economic decisions depend on governance and social norms. Technological adoption depends on education and infrastructure. Cultural values shape cooperation and innovation. Environmental conditions constrain and direct adaptation. Disturbances in one area propagate through the network, producing systemic effects. Civilization is not linear. It is a web of interconnected processes where feedback loops continuously adjust behavior and outcomes across time and space. The accumulation of knowledge and experience creates long-term feedback effects. Societies remember past successes and failures, encoding lessons in laws, rituals, education, and institutions. These records influence future decisions, shaping the probability of success or failure in governance, trade, technology, and resource management. Collective memory interacts with innovation and experimentation, creating adaptive cycles that reinforce stability while enabling growth. Civilization advances through this continuous loop of observation, action, feedback, and adaptation. Cultural evolution interacts with these systemic forces. Norms, beliefs, and practices are transmitted across generations, influencing cooperation, conflict resolution, and innovation. Successful practices are retained and reinforced, while ineffective ones are discarded or modified. Cultural feedback loops operate in tandem with technological, economic, and environmental systems, shaping behavior, organization, and societal trajectory. Over long periods, these loops contribute to the emergence of complex societies capable of sustaining large populations and diverse institutions. Feedback loops operate not only within societies, but between them. Trade, diplomacy, migration, and conflict connect communities, creating interdependent networks. Actions in one society influence others, producing cascading effects that reshape regions and continents. Innovations diffuse through these networks, while crises propagate as well. Global patterns emerge from these interactions, illustrating that civilization is not isolated, but part of a larger system in which hidden forces continuously interact and reinforce one another. Civilizations display both stability and adaptability because of these interacting systems. Feedback loops allow societies to absorb shocks, correct errors, and exploit opportunities. They provide inertia that maintains structure and flexibility that permits change. Large-scale patterns, from urbanization to technological progress, emerge as the result of continuous, multi-layered interactions. Invisible forces operating across biology, psychology, culture, technology, and environment shape human behavior, institutional development, and societal evolution, demonstrating that complexity arises naturally from the interconnectedness of systems. Ultimately, systemic feedback loops reveal that civilization is not a collection of random events or purely deliberate actions. Instead, it is an emergent property of multiple interacting forces. These forces operate quietly, continuously, and invisibly, producing predictable patterns, unexpected transformations, and enduring structures. By examining the interdependence of human cognition, culture, technology, economy, governance, and environment, it becomes clear that civilization evolves as a dynamic, self-organizing system, guided by feedback that links past behavior, present action, and future outcomes. The hidden architecture of these loops directs the course of human history, creating resilience, adaptation, and large-scale societal transformation without any single actor controlling the outcome. Human civilization can be understood as a vast, interconnected network of hidden forces, operating continuously across time and space. Every individual, institution, and innovation exists within this network, influenced by biological tendencies, psychological patterns, cultural norms, environmental conditions, technological infrastructure, and governance systems. These layers of influence interact constantly, forming loops that amplify, stabilize, or constrain behavior. From the smallest village to sprawling modern cities, human activity unfolds according to patterns that emerge naturally from these interwoven forces, often without conscious awareness. Even actions that seem spontaneous are guided by the invisible architecture of social, cultural, and systemic pressures. Looking closely, one can see how each force contributes to the ongoing shaping of society. Biological tendencies provide the foundation for behavior. Humans seek survival, safety, connection, and reproduction. Psychological patterns, such as bias, attention, and learning, direct choices in the ways that are both predictable and subtle. Culture overlays these behaviors with norms, rituals, and moral expectations that guide cooperation, trust, and hierarchy. Religion and ideology reinforce these expectations, offering frameworks that influence collective behavior and social cohesion. Together, these layers form the invisible scaffolding upon which civilization is built, providing stability, continuity, and direction. Institutions, governance, and legal systems extend this scaffolding into structured forms. Authority, legitimacy, social contracts, and enforcement mechanisms organize collective behavior, channeling individual tendencies into patterns that support cooperation and resource management. Bureaucracies and procedural systems ensure consistency, translating human action into predictable outcomes. When combined with economic structures, technology, and communication networks, these institutional forces allow societies to operate at scales far beyond the capacity of individual cognition, creating complex systems capable of sustaining millions of people in coordinated activity over long periods. Technological and communication networks serve as both connectors and amplifiers. Roads, ports, digital systems, and information channels accelerate the flow of knowledge, goods, and ideas. They allow rapid coordination, enable large-scale collaboration, and extend the reach of governance and cultural influence. At the same time, dependence on these networks introduces vulnerabilities. Failures, bottlenecks, or misuse can propagate disruptions widely. Innovations act as catalysts, shifting the balance of feedback loops, enabling new forms of organization, and producing unforeseen consequences that ripple through society. The invisible influence of technology shapes the pace, structure, and resilience of civilizations, often more powerfully than a visible leadership or legislation. Environmental and geographical factors provide constraints that guide adaptation. Climate, natural resources, topography, and ecological pressures determine where communities can thrive, which crops can be grown, and how settlements develop. Human ingenuity modifies these constraints through irrigation, construction, transportation, and resource management. Yet the environment retains influence, shaping patterns of urbanization, trade, and risk management. Geography and climate function as hidden regulators, interacting with culture, technology, and governance to guide the long-term trajectory of societies, creating both opportunities and limitations that persist across centuries. Systemic feedback loops integrate these forces, producing emergent patterns and complex behaviors. Small actions accumulate across individuals and institutions, resulting in large-scale consequences. Economic decisions, social norms, governance practices, and technological use feed back on one another, creating cycles of growth, stability, or collapse. Tipping points emerge when incremental changes exceed thresholds, producing rapid societal transformation. Resilience arises from the system's ability to absorb shocks, adjust behavior, and maintain continuity. Civilization advances not as a series of isolated events, but as the cumulative effect of continuous, multi-layered feedback operating across human, ecological, and technological systems. Observing these patterns over centuries reveals stable principles of organization. Societies that maintain cohesion, enforce norms, manage resources effectively, and adapt to environmental and technological change tend to endure. Hierarchies, specialization, cooperative networks, and communication infrastructure recur across time and place, reflecting solutions to common human and ecological challenges. Cultures that transmit knowledge efficiently and integrate feedback from past experience develop more complex institutions and more resilient societies. These principles are not deterministic rules, but recurring patterns that highlight the persistent influence of hidden forces in shaping collective outcomes. Despite the pervasive influence of these forces, human agency remains evident within constraints. Individuals innovate, challenge norms, and create new systems. Leaders implement policies, inventors develop technologies, and communities adjust customs to fit circumstances. Yet these acts of agency occur within the invisible network of prior conditions, feedback loops, and structural limitations. Choices are guided, enabled, and sometimes constrained by the interaction of biological, psychological, cultural, and systemic forces. Recognizing this interplay clarifies that while humans shape civilization, they do so within a context of complex, continuous influence that extends beyond immediate perception. History illustrates this tension between agency and structure. Civilizations rise and fall, not only because of deliberate human decision-making, but also due to cumulative interactions among hidden forces. Technological innovation, cultural norms, environmental shifts, and social networks interact to produce outcomes that cannot be fully predicted from individual actions alone. The success of a society often depends on aligning human behavior with systemic dynamics, harnessing feedback loops, and adapting to constraints imposed by geography, climate, resources, and social structures. Human agency is meaningful, yet it is exercised within an intricate, often invisible web of influence. The philosophical reflection is that civilization is both created by humans and shaped by forces they rarely perceive. Life unfolds within the boundaries established by biology, psychology, culture, environment, technology, and governance. Individuals influence the system, yet they are guided by it as well. This duality, agency within systemic constraint, provides perspective on human behavior, societal change, and historical development. Observing civilization through this lens encourages recognition of the patterns that endure across time, offering insight into the stability, adaptability, and fragility of human organization. Patterns become evident in modern and historical societies alike. Urban density, trade networks, governance hierarchies, technological adoption, and cultural cohesion emerge repeatedly as responses to fundamental human and environmental conditions. Feedback loops amplify both successes and failures, producing predictable trajectories for societal development. Even large-scale shifts, from the rise of empires to global trade systems, reflect the compounding effects of multiple hidden forces operating across scales. Civilization is, therefore, a dynamic process, continuously evolving in response to internal and external pressures, guided by forces often invisible yet consistently influential. Understanding these hidden forces provides insight into resilience and vulnerability. Societies that maintain robust feedback systems, adaptable norms, and effective information channels survive crises more effectively, those that fail to integrate these mechanisms experience instability, conflict, or collapse. The principles of stability, cohesion, adaptability, redundancy, and knowledge transmission operate quietly, yet they define the potential for success across centuries. Observing patterns over time reveals that survival and progress depend on the continuous interplay of human behavior, social structures, and environmental and technological constraints. Ultimately, civilization is best understood as a network of continuous influence. Every aspect, from individual psychology to global communication, contributes to the whole. Hidden forces act simultaneously, interacting to produce emergent outcomes that sustain, transform, or challenge societies. The patterns are persistent yet adaptable, allowing continuity while permitting innovation. Human activity is guided as much by these invisible forces as by deliberate intention. Recognizing their role illuminates the structure underlying apparent randomness, revealing civilization as a product of both visible choices and invisible, ongoing dynamics. In reflection, one sees that human organization is neither entirely determined nor entirely free. Civilization exists in the space between choice and constraint, action and feedback. Knowledge of these forces allows for more informed action, guiding decisions that align with systemic realities. Yet, even with awareness, complexity ensures that outcomes cannot be fully predicted. The subtle interplay of biology, psychology, culture, technology, governance, and environment continues to guide human activity, creating the hidden architecture of civilization that has persisted across centuries and will continue to shape societies for generations to come. We can perceive civilization as a living system, one that adapts, evolves, and responds to countless interacting factors. Individuals, communities, and institutions contribute to patterns of stability and change, but the underlying network of influence is pervasive. Hidden forces operate at every scale, integrating the past with the present to shape the future. Observing this network clarifies that human history is not a series of isolated events, but a continuous unfolding of interactions among layered systems that guide behavior, produce resilience, and create the complex patterns of civilization that endure through time.